Welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Part 1 led us through all kinds of information from an angry Kansas mom who says, well, she doesn't feel like she's in Kansas anymore. We're going to go live with a great mom, and Jon Uhler is standing by as well. Jon, let's bring you into the show right now. And Jon and our angry mom from Kansas are going to bring up, they've gone through a lot in our part 1, so you want to go back and take a look at that, number 1. Number 2, as we head forward, we are just at a critical part of how this all came to be is what I'm getting at it, and how this is really wreaking havoc on our school systems, not only in America, but also here in Canada too. Jon?
Brad, thank you. And Denise, we're going to pick up where we left off. I recommend people go back and watch the first part of this episode because you are describing what's going on in schools, diversity, equity, these different terms. There's actual programs going on, and I was making the case that this sets kids up to be unduly influenced. You were as well, but then grooming is very much taking place, and as mandated reporters, educators, teachers need to understand the signs of sexual grooming. That is part and parcel, unfortunately, of what happens when you start teaching this. So Denise, pick up where we left off as far as your concerns, and what did you start to see with these trainings in your schools?
Okay. Point of clarification first. I used the word grooming when I spoke to the legislators about this, and I feel like we need to kind of drill down on this a little bit. There were articles written about how I was accusing everyone of being a child predator, and I want to make a clarification. When I say grooming, I don't mean that your ultimate goal is to touch a child. What I see is adults, whether it be this DEIB initiative or social emotional learning or teaching kids about trans and queerness, I see adults who are trying to get something for themselves, whether it's virtue or it's, I'm doing good work, I'm helping kids, whether it's, just serving as representation. I see that as you using children to get your own needs met. And so when you come in and you're speaking to 4th grade students about your transition process, that's taking your emotional needs and putting them above what's healthy for these children. And that's what I mean when I say grooming. I mean it in the way that you say it. I mean, I have an ugly term that I use for this, but it's kind of like you may not be touching the child, but you're getting some sort of personal gratification out of what you're exposing these children to. And a lot of times you're doing it without their parents' knowledge. And so now you have a secret relationship, right? Which is step 1. And when you do that, you've automatically, when you're the cool teacher at school who wants to talk about edgy stuff with my kid, you're putting a wedge in between my child and her parents. And I think we know that destabilizes children. We know that. So why would you feel like, well, I'm a trans person and I want kids to know that there are people like you and it's okay. Why would you do that at the expense of destabilizing these children by severing part of the relationship with their parent? So when I see,
Denise,
I don't want you to hear that I'm seeing a predator behind every corner, but it's almost the equivalent.
There you go. And where you're being very kind, and when you were speaking from the legislature and they're saying, well, you're not suggesting that. Now I can, with my clinical background, I can pick up at this point to reemphasize. I would go so far as to say this: if you're an adult and you're a mandated reporter and you're talking about sexual stuff with a kid, sex and sexuality, outside of an actual sex ed course, without the deviant stuff that we have going on. If you are talking about sex and sexuality related material outside of that specifically designed course and those parameters, you're grooming a kid. And if you don't like this, Mr. Administrator or Mr. or Mrs. Teacher, then get a different career. Don't you dare start talking sexual stuff with a kid for gratuitous purposes. Adults know, teachers know that that's out of bounds. And so if somebody is so driven, either by their own stuff or especially a male, to introduce this stuff, we have a very potentially dangerous situation, and administrators and teachers have a responsibility to keep their kids safe. So, Denise, you couldn't say it, I did. So continue.
I just, I think it's the part of me that I think this stuff preys on, is we want to be compassionate. We want to be understanding. And I don't feel angry. I feel concerned. I'm so concerned for these kids and for other parents to know that this is potentially what your kid is going through at school, especially with COVID when we weren't even allowed in the school. And a lot of this was put on hyperdrive when that happened, because that's when the things could go up on the wall and the books could go in the library because there were no parents in the building. We were locked out. So the first thing that we looked into was the DEIB training. We got a manual from an adjoining district, and this is entitled Gender and Children, A Place to Begin. Creating schools that nurture academic achievement, provide physical and emotional safety, and welcome all students is a common goal for all educators. In order for students to feel supported and empowered to express their identities and interests at school, educators must create gender-inclusive environments that both affirm all children and help them move beyond the limitations of gender stereotyping. So this is what teachers are being instructed to do. And we have the thing that I think made it so egregious in our district, and I know of other districts where I since have found that this is happening, is this is being incorporated into teacher evaluations. So there's a new rubric where you have to show that you are doing culturally competent teaching or culturally responsive teaching. And by culture, we're talking about a lot of categories. We're talking race, we're talking sex, gender, religion. So in order for you to demonstrate that you are a welcoming environment to people across the gender spectrum, how do you do that? Well, you have to put something on the wall, or you have to wear a pin, or you have to have a safe space, or you have to have your pronouns in your lanyard so that kids feel welcome and they can learn. But what they're actually doing is they're generating those questions, because the kid says, well, what is that? Well, why are you wearing earrings? Well, your wife does your hair. Well, why does your wife do your hair? Why are you wearing high heels? You see what I'm saying? So they're making it mandatory for teachers to do this on the basis of their evaluation. And they actually have a walkthrough tool where they can walk through the teacher's classroom after hours and make sure that these things are being displayed. So when parents are looking at these classroom pictures that they're seeing on things like Libs of TikTok and that kind of stuff, and they think, this teacher's off the rails, that's crazy. What they need to understand is this teacher is doing this because their evaluation depends on it. And in our DEIB training, the guy who does it, his name's Gary Howard, he talks about they use strategies. Like, first, the DEIB coordinator is supposed to go into each each school building, and find the people who are most committed to the work, and they become the people who go learn to be facilitators. And one of their jobs is to identify potential pockets of resistance in the building. Yeah.
Okay. And everybody needs to let that sink in.
I can show you this.
Right.
And he also says that potential pockets of resistance usually include those conservative white male social studies types. So then they go into this training and they're not seeing what the facilitator sees. I have the facilitator's guide, so I was seeing it. And he does one where he says, this is just for facilitators. And he takes his glasses off and he gets real serious. Like, we're just, you and I are talking here, right? And he instructs them on how to manipulate people. You start with groups and you look to make sure you're getting buy-in. And he talks about evidence of resistance, like averting one's eyes is a demonstration of resistance. And how are we going to get these people to buy in? And this one woman says, we don't start with white fragility. First, we just build rapport, right? We get everybody comfortable first. And so he talks about taking them from larger groups to now you're going to have groups of 3. Then if that doesn't work, if you're not getting buy-in, you're going to go to pair and share, which means it's one-on-one. And if that doesn't work, then you're going to start revealing some of the things that these people have written into what they thought was going to be anonymous or private. You start revealing some of this stuff to the colleagues, and you just say to the person, listen, we're all on board with this work and we're really happy to be here. And you're just going to have to sit there in your own negativity. And if that doesn't work, he says,
let me jump in.
Evaluations.
Yeah, let me jump in just for a moment, because people need to understand Mother Jones and the New York Times just trying to do an article. They're going to do a breaking article on these conspiracy groups, these right-wing conspiracy groups, even though they're usually you've got
stand up against this, you automatically become right-wing.
Right. Even though you could be a lesbian, you could be a radical feminist that simply doesn't want men in women's sports, doesn't want men in women's prisons. You're getting yelled at, calling kill TERFs and all that.
Or you could be a mom that just thinks it's important that your kid learns to read.
There you go. So there's a term that is being floated by Mother Jones online magazine, this reporter, and said this: oh, these conspiratorial types, they're creating a playbook that's going to be used to influence legislation. So as you're reading this, okay, so they've used the term playbook as conspiratorial, but what you're listing for us is a playbook.
Sure. This is how you get all the teachers on board. This is how you get every teacher with a lapel pin and a flag, or fearful for their job if they avert their eyes.
If they are pockets of resistance. Isn't that interesting? That should bring to mind totalitarian type of language. We have right? We have pockets of resistance. We will help you. Yes. It's a program or find a new job. Okay, that's what's happening to these teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you see these teachers, understand that this may not be, this is a plan to get these things on every wall. And it's actually, I stand back and look at it now, and I'm kind of in awe of it. It's really like they really thought about this and put this together well. I'm going to just give you some samples from this book. Build student allies. With your class, look at ways to be an ally when someone is teased or bullied for any reason. Can they try to stop it directly? Should they talk with an adult? Use the Welcoming Schools Making Decisions ally or bystander lesson to help students think through the option. When we get into the SEL lessons, that'll be next. That's one of the lessons that was hugely problematic for us, and I can explain to you why later. But the idea is, if you are not an ally, if you're not on board with this work, then you're just a bystander, and you're not allowed to be a bystander. You've got to be involved. You can't avert your eyes. You can't just participate in the training. You've got to get in. But what I just showed you is this trickles down to the classroom. There were exercises that were done in this training that then were done in my child's classroom, and I have the exercises that he completed to show you. So
and
what
people need to understand, this is by very definition, this is activism in schools.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. 100%. Here, create classroom displays that show a wide range of occupations and achievements for all genders. Ask students to write biographies or make hallway displays featuring people who have moved beyond traditional gender roles and excelled in their chosen fields. Any of that sound familiar to what you're seeing in classrooms? Read books to your class that teach about gender and break down stereotypes related to gender expression and gender identity. Develop classroom messages that emphasize all children can dance, cook, have short or long hair, do math, or make art. Group students in ways that do not rely on gender. Provide role models. Use lesson plans designed to expand students' understanding of gender. I'm sorry, I thought they weren't doing that in Kansas. So that's from one school. I'm going to pull up let's see. We'll leave that alone for now. We'll get into that later. Here's the teacher evaluation walkthrough tool for DEIB. And of course it goes into, we can't Maslow until we bloom. The goal of our work is not diversity, not equity, not inclusion. It's belonging. A sense of belonging is defined as feeling accepted and liked by the rest of the group, feeling connected to others, and feeling like a member of the community. So the point is not that we are tolerant. The point is not that we are accepting. It's not that we don't notice. How do I, if you come to my home, how do I make you feel welcome? I'm so glad you're here. I have to celebrate you. My home needs to be prepared for you to feel welcome. So I'm going to think about what I need to do to my home. I mean, I've made the joke periodically, and it may not land at this point, but maybe I should have some bestiality porn playing on my TV, because you never know when somebody's going to drop by and that's their thing. And I want everyone to feel welcome. But remember, we're not drawing any lines, right? So who's welcome and who's not? Who do we celebrate? Or is there anything that we don't celebrate? And we're talking about kids whose brains they're not even developed, and you're not even teaching them to read at this point. Look at their test scores. And this is where we're putting our focus. So I went in, we moved here in 2017, and I noticed after the third semester that my daughter's math scores were dropping consistently every semester. And when I went in and I said, has anyone noticed that she's crashing and burning in math? I mean, she's getting tearful at home. She's beginning to think she's just not good at math. And they said, well, she's still on grade level. And I said, I brought her to you above grade level. Does math matter anymore? Because she's getting in the car and she's talking to me about what trans is and what sexual harassment is, but her test scores are plummeting. What is our priority here? So that's just another, okay, so now I know what's important at this school. That's going to be your DEIB training. And then there's a video that I think Brad has that I can share. He may add it, but the guy who does our DEIB training, he tells a story of being in an 8th grade social studies class. And when he's done with the lesson, a 13-year-old girl approaches him and she says, Mr. Howard, I just feel like I want to claw off my white skin. So we're focusing on identities. We're celebrating certain identities and not other identities. And we're saying we who, I guess, as my daughter was starting to understand, are hateful, we need to start celebrating these people. So
let's go ahead and roll that video right now and we'll come back.
Go ahead.
Okay, let's do that now.
And that makes me very upset.
There were a couple guys who rode my bus and just spent the entire time throwing around like homophobic slurs and talking about how much they like hated and feared and felt disgusted by gay people.
When I came to school in September, it was a lot of conversations. People would ask their friends like, oh, is that a boy or a girl? Or like, what is that boy wearing? Or like, is that boy wearing a skirt? Just really ignorant things that I found to be really offensive and really hurtful. It made learning very difficult, and it made just walking from class to class very difficult, and staying happy and keeping my grades up difficult.
People would just call me like gay and like names and stuff, and people would just like pick on me and just left me out of like things, you know. I was feeling really depressed.
I felt really bad for the person they were talking about, and it kind of just made me feel like, wow, these people are really mean, you know.
It just creates fear, and it just makes people want to hide.
It lets people know that school is a place where there is this type of judgment and where people are going to judge you for how you express yourself and are going to talk about it and are going to perpetuate these stigmas. And I don't think that's okay at all.
It's hard to see people who might be different to be picked on like that. I like to see different because that's what makes us human.
Denise, that's a great example of what's happening.
Well, that was training for the teachers. And for me, early on, I thought, okay, I didn't understand how they were being manipulated into agreeing with this. And I didn't understand that their job depended on it. So when I saw it, I thought, okay, anyone who's been through this training and is okay with all of this, I don't want my child in that person's classroom. So I was pretty convicted then, but then we got into social emotional learning. Our school uses a program called Second Step. They work directly writing lessons for Teaching for Justice, which was formerly the Southern Poverty Law Center. You've got big think tanks creating this. It is a playbook, it is a blueprint, and it's going out in districts all across the country. I've been told that it targets more affluent districts outside of major cities, which is why we saw it early. We had a school board that was very excited about this. And so we were one of the first districts to start this program. But the social emotional learning is part of the strategic plan, and it's coming down from your state boards of education, but it goes even higher than that. It goes all the way to UNESCO. I hate hearing myself say that, but I've done the work. I've looked at it. It's coming from the Fetzer Institute. It's very spirituality based. They talk about creating a more inclusive religion. My issue with this, as we're a Christian family, so if you're telling my daughter what she has to do and think to be considered a good person, you're automatically, again, we go back to that wedge between the child and the parent. If you're telling my daughter, you can't be a bystander anymore, you have to be an upstander. That's one of the social emotional learning second step lessons. This is a girl who's pretty introverted. She has a really difficult time saying no. I don't like the word people pleaser. I tend to think of it more as she has a more agreeable temperament. Relationship is super important to her. So she's going to put herself out to make everyone in the room comfortable. She's not going to say, it's time for you to go, I'm tired. If someone calls and wants her to babysit, she's going to say yes every single time. She'll come to me and say, Mom, I really don't want to do it, but I just didn't feel like I could say no. So this is the personality that we're dealing with. And we have teachers telling her, in order to be a good person, you have to stand up for the oppressed. You have to create disruption strategies. You have to insert yourself. It comes in the being an ally lesson. I'll give you a backdrop. Here's an example. My daughter has a group of friends and they go way back. One is more of a dominant personality. She's got older siblings. She's kind of street savvy. Another one is the oldest in her family. She's very tender. She loves animals. They're all precious girls. And then one's always in the middle. It's just 4 girls and it's adorable. 2 were having a misunderstanding. And I'm looking at Kylie's phone. This is later. And I see where she's inserted herself into this disagreement between these 2 girls. And it's in the form of, you 2 girls love each other. You know, you get sideways sometimes, but at the end of the day, you love each other. What's going on? Let's work this out. Well, then another girl brought in an older girl into this text exchange who then starts threatening my kiddo and saying, I know where you live. I'm going to come beat you up. And I find out she's 15. So there are 2 things that we do, especially me with my girls. The first rule is we are not participants in girl drama. We are not entertained by girl drama, because if you are the girl that is sitting around listening to girls who stir it up, one of these days it's going to come for you. And if you've been entertained by that and participated in that, then you deserve it when it comes for you. Okay, so that's rule number one. Rule number two is if a fight breaks out, you get the heck out of there, right? There was just a shooting at my daughter's work a mile from our house a couple of months ago. And my husband's first words to her was, get bricks between you and that building. We teach our children, if physical violence is happening, you get the heck out of there, because you never know what a person has in their pocket. You never know the backstory of what's going on in this fight. You never have all the information. So those are family rules. If they're teaching children that to be a good person, you have to insert yourself, and that's the opposite of what they're being taught at home, you're putting that wedge between parent and child again. And the parents are at home and they have no idea this is going on. And if you ask about it, they say, well, we're just trying to teach children good decision making because studies show that children with high SEL competencies do better academically.
Denise, what you've just described is, for instance, when we as adults, as parents, we look on the news and we see these students that are doing these protests outside of the classroom, and we wonder, what, did these students just suddenly have this idea spontaneously? They all get up, they go out. What you're saying is, behind the scenes, there are adults that are coordinating this.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, one of the things that they also do, they'll present videos in the social emotional learning, for example, anti-bullying. We're just doing anti-bullying. But there are subtleties within the videos, and I've given Brad a video that he can share with you. Bullying is only done by certain groups of people, and only certain groups of people are bullied. And they don't come out and say it, but it's very evident. And my daughter was told that trans kids are bullied because Christians don't believe in that. Well, what did you just do? Now I have a daughter coming to the car saying, why do we hate trans people? There's the wedge. There's the wedge, because you're not just telling they're not just telling your child things about the community, or this is what, I mean, they're directly telling you, if your parents are white, Christian, hetero, cis, able-bodied, then they are in the oppressor category. And these are the people who your parents have been oppressing. So here comes the wedge. Guess what? Your parents are not good people, and you need to learn how to do the right thing and be an upstander.
And hopefully that helps people understand why, on the heels of Black Lives Matter, which is then ushered in through CRT now in schools. So we see BLM, and about 4 weeks into these riots, all of a sudden we saw signs that said trans lives matter. So it's the same methodology, it's the same tactic used with a different subject, but it's all to begin to unduly influence the minds and the emotions of these kids. Denise, you're going to unpack for us in the future really how this is being used to script the minds of and the emotions of young kids in schools.
I think parents need to be aware of it. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like my daughter was really being taught self-hatred. And she was really looking for a way out. I hope that next time we can get into the activist teachers and the social workers.
It's crucial that we do so. So I appreciate it. And Brad, we will pick it up at this point next time when we continue with Denise.
Thank you both for being here today. Can't say enough about all this information. You know, you're educating parents in a way that they need the help right now, and they need to help get through this. So thank you both very much. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Thank you very much for watching. We've got another great episode with our angry mom from Kansas coming up. Please make sure you see all of our episodes. They're online. You can like, share, subscribe as well. Check us out at unmaskingthetransmovement.com. Till next time, I'll see you soon.